Well, believe it or not, wildfire season is upon us. The fires burning in Alberta, Canada are giving us a preview of what we could see right here in the inland Northwest.
So in a special report, our chief meteorologist Jeremy Legoo looks into what we could expect to see later this summer and if our cool, wet spring had any impact.
This is a 1997 BMW M3. More specifically, it's my BMW M3, which means I've rebuilt the engine for more power, and I'm currently yanking out the automatic transmission and replacing it with a manual transmission for more fun. For me, driving cars is a passion. It's where I feel most free. But CO2 emissions from, well, transportation here in the US are a major factor in climate change, and climate change is playing a big role in our fire season here in the inland Northwest.
The trends over the last 10 years have been towards more severe fire seasons due to hotter and drier summers.
That's meteorologist Matt Deer with the Washington Department of Natural Resources. When we talk average fire season now, it means something drastically different than it did, say, 10 years ago. Hotter, drier summers dry out vegetation like trees, brush, or even grass, and that allows things to ignite faster and fires to grow more rapidly and burn hotter, becoming more devastating. Last year felt like a calm fire season, especially in recent memory. But in the big picture, it really wasn't as calm as it might have seemed.
In Washington, we still burned about 170,000 acres, which compared to the last 10 years is about 200,000 acres below normal. However, if you look at our average acres burned between 1992 and 2010, in that time frame, we only averaged 140,000 acres a year.
The average fire season now burns almost double the acres in the state of Washington than it did, say, 10 years ago. And that seems to be a trend across much of the western US. And that means it's time to change how we think about fire season. Right now, things are looking good. Our cool, wet spring gave life to the snowpack in the mountains and filled our vegetation with moisture, meaning potential fuels are harder to ignite and it's harder to get those fires to spread, for now. Forecasts indicate a below average start to fire season. Thanks to our cool, wet spring, it looks like we're pretty good through the start of summer. In general, our summers have been hotter and drier, meaning our fuels like grass, trees, or brush dry out, and that makes them more prone to burning. So overall, a fire that might start in a calm season and just fizzle out has the ability to grow faster, spread quicker, and burn hotter, becoming much more devastating. This year looks to be no exception to our recent pattern. We currently sit under an El Nino watch, with a 60% chance of an El Nino forming by July. What that would mean is an even hotter, even drier summer than what has become our new norm. Because of that forecast, long-range outlooks put the possibility of more devastating wildfires occurring later on this summer. It essentially boils down to what starts the fires. Historically, lightning is responsible for some of our biggest wildfires in the Northwest. Lightning strikes in remote areas can spark fires that are hard for crews to access, allowing the fires to grow more freely. As storm activity calms later in summer, it's all on us. Our primary ignition source of wildfires in the Northwest is humans. That includes things like campfires, fireworks, power lines, cigarettes, tow chains on trucks, and a whole lot more. There's no magic crystal ball that can predict where our fires will be or how many we'll see in a given season. But what we do know is that fire season is getting worse, and that is thanks to our hotter, drier summers across the Northwest. It boils down to fire weather days. Hot, dry, windy conditions are when we see most fire ignitions and most rapid fire growth. By exercising caution on extreme fire danger days, we can make a difference.
I think that's just it.
Right.
You know, as I put together this whole forecast, there's no crystal ball. You can't say what's going to happen. And that's really what it comes down to, us kind of making that difference. Now, in recent years, there's been an increase in fires in the eastern foothills of the Cascades, so kind of our side of the Cascades. Think like Chelan County, that area, where we've seen burn almost every single year. Those fires are becoming more common and more intense later on in the season. I don't want to say they're a guarantee, but fire, I guess, crews are starting to look at that area as something that is going to burn every year. So we have to start being more vigilant.
Right.
Okay, so I have a question. You referenced kind of last year's spring, which was very cool and very wet compared to what we're used to.
Yeah.
We've also kind of experienced that to some extent this year, but it feels different. Is it because we're warming up so much faster?
Yeah, and I think that is really what it comes down to. We went from cool and wet and everything seemed kind of normal, and then we just flipped and turned that switch. Now, last year I talked a lot about the grasses that were growing so high. This year we don't seem to have that. It was that sudden switch. So we went from cool and wet and everything was great to all of a sudden it just turned off, and that's kind of quelled some of that growth, which is good for fire season, but when it comes to those hot, dry days and the potential for wind, it's not good.
What I thought was interesting is last year we all thought we had a really good fire season because we didn't have as many acres burned as we did in previous fire seasons. But if you compare last year to what we saw maybe a decade ago, it still burned more acres than we burned a decade ago. So the trend is certainly not going in the right direction.
No, absolutely not. And I actually got that piece of information from one of Mark's interviews because we were talking about going, this is absolutely incredible and we're not really talking about it. So instead of really diving into, what exactly is going to burn and where and why, I thought it was more interesting to kind of take a look at that and say, hey, overall, we have something we know we need to be watching for.
Yeah, good information for sure.